Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Red Pill Garage. Does your car need a new water pump? How often should you replace your water pump? What does a water pump exactly do? Do you want to know how to replace your water pump? You can fix it yourself easily. Let me teach you guys on how to replace your water pump and flush your cooling system. The job of the water pump is to keep the engine coolant circulating from the engine to the radiator and from the radiator back to the engine to achieve a normal operating temperature. A water pump roughly pumps out about 1.7 million litres of coolant per 100,000 kilometres. Now if your car's engine's fitted with a timing belt, it's a decision you should make to replace it now rather than doing the job twice. As with most cars fitted with timing belts, you have to replace the timing belt at 100,000 kilometres anyway on most cars. Making the decision not to replace the water pump, you're assuming it may last another 100,000 kilometre cycle. In the event of the water pump failing, it can cause the engine to overheat, which will be catastrophic for your car's engine and your pocket. Now on this particular car, a Hyundai Getz, I've purchased a timing belt and water pump kit as it's due for a timing belt replacement. In this video, I'll be concentrating more on teaching you guys on the details of replacing the water pump and cooling system flush rather the details of replacing the bearings and seals from this timing belt kit. To see the full details on that job, I urge you guys to watch episode 20. Okay, these are the tools I'll be using on today's job. An air operated oil extractor, a flexible driver, a couple of flat blade screwdrivers and a Phillips screwdriver, a hose pick, and WD-40, a multifunction cleaner, some thread locker, our scraper, some emery cloth, a pry bar, electric screwdriver, a torch, half-inch breaker bar, ratchet, extension bar and torque wrench. Then we have a 3/8 drive, 1/4 inch drive air ratchets, 3/8 drive extension bars, breaker bar and ratchet. And in the background there we've got a 3/8 drive swivel, 14, 12 and 10mm sockets. Then in 1/4 inch drive we have another 10mm socket, a 3/8 drive torque wrench, two 22mm half-inch sockets and a 17 socket. 1/4 inch drive ratchet, extension bar, a 10, 12, 14 ring spanner, a 12 ratchet spanner, a 10mm and 17mm combination spanners, a spill-free funnel, impact gun, multi-grips, pliers, a telescopic mirror, some whiteout, Durco sealant, and hose clamp pliers. And this is a cooling system pressure test kit. All the different types of adapters in there. And that's a vacuum purge unit that you see there. Now you don't have to go out and buy something as full on as this. You can buy cheaper pressure test kits out there, but I just wanted to give you an idea what a mechanic would use. And that's the actual pump that we pump the pressure into the cooling system. And that there are the different size radiator cap adapters. And don't forget your safety glasses. Okay, first thing, start your engine up and then turn your heater control all the way to hot, then turn your engine off. And the reason for this is because we're going to flush out the heater core as well. Now what you need to do is to locate the heater hoses. On this particular car, the Hyundai Getz, I need to remove the air cleaner lid, and there's our heater hose, 1 out of 2, and that's the hose I have to remove. And always wait until the engine is cool before working in any part of the cooling system, otherwise you could burn yourself because the water will be pretty hot. And just make sure you've got a drip tray under the engine to catch that coolant, because you don't want it going down the drain because it's bad for the environment. Okay, what I'm doing here, I'm actually flushing out the heater inside the car And this is why we turn the heater control on to hot. Otherwise, if we forget, we can't force water through the heater and that water would just spray you in the face. That's why you've got to make sure you've got your safety glasses on. Now we'll just keep flushing this until the water comes clear. I'll be flushing different sections of the cooling system, and I find this to be the most effective and quickest way to get rid of the old coolant. Once you see it coming out pretty clean, you can put a stop to that section. Now I'll be flushing out as much of what's left of the coolant in the radiator. Now you won't get it all out because on the other side of the cooling system is the thermostat. And as the engine is cold, the thermostat is actually shut. And this is why I flush different sections at a time. And blocking off that heater pipe with my finger, you can actually see now the water for the heater is flowing in the other direction. Okay, now it's time to locate the radiator petcock or the actual drain plug, and there it is there on this car. Okay, just make sure you got your drip tray underneath to catch that coolant. And make sure you don't lose the rubber washer that comes out with that plug. And you can see there's a very faint colour of green, so we've got most of that coolant out of the system. And now what you want to do is put your hose through the radiator to flush out any sediment at the bottom of the radiator tank. Next I'll be using the air operated oil extractor, and I'll be sucking out what's left of the coolant in the reservoir bottle. Now if you don't have one of these tools, it's no big deal. You can remove the bottle out of the car and tip the coolant out into your drip tray. Now that I've completed flushing the cooling system, I want to refit that heater hose, but before I do that I'm going to remove that spring steel hose clamp and fit it with a new hose clamp. Being spring steel, once you put tension on it, it loses its strength. So you want to make sure you don't use it twice. And now the radiator's been completely drained, you want to make sure that rubber washer or gasket is still there before you screw the plug back in, otherwise you'll have a major leak on your hands. And when screwing that plug back in, keep in mind it's made out of plastic, so don't go over tightening it because you'll strip it. Okay, next what you want to do is to raise the car so you can remove the right hand front wheel. And just make sure you're using good quality jack stands. And once you remove the wheel, place the wheel under the car so if anything was to go wrong and the car was to fall, it would land on the wheel, not on yourself. Next, remove the right hand side cover. Then temporarily loosen the water pump pulley bolts. Then later on I'm going to show you guys a nice easy way to remove those bolts out nice and easy, because it is a tight squeeze to get your hand in there. Okay, with a 14mm ring spanner, loosen off the tensioner pulley bolt, because now we want to remove that belt. That's the adjuster. And with the 12mm ring spanner, we want to loosen off the alternator pivoting nut at the bottom of the alternator. Then remove the engine dipstick so we can get to the adjuster on the alternator to drop the alternator belt, then finally remove the air conditioning belt. And that's the adjuster there for the alternator. And now we can remove that alternator belt. Once you've removed each of the belts, you want to inspect them for any cracks or damage. And there's the air conditioning belt. And that's absolutely cactus, that belt. You can see the big cracks in that. Definitely got to replace that belt for sure. Okay, next with the whiteout, you want to mark your belts. And that one there I've labelled AC for air conditioning, even though we're going to replace that belt. And the next one's the alternator, because when you purchase the new belts, on the box it will give you a part number but doesn't tell you what application it's for, so that's why I like to still mark them that way so I can compare them. Next, crack loose the power steering pivoting bolt at the bottom of the power steering pump, and the next bolt there that we're going to get to, we have to go through the power steering pulley. You don't want to go through the top there with an open end spanner because you'll probably round it off because they're super tight. We're going to go straight through there. And this is one of the reasons why we take off the power steering belt last, because if the other two belts were on there, we wouldn't be able to turn it so easy by hand. We have that luxury now of moving that pulley in any direction we want. Now it's just a matter of pushing that pump back and taking the belt off. And again, the same thing, inspect the belt. And you can see that's cactus as well, that's full of cracks. So we're going to replace that belt also. Remember earlier when I said I was going to show you guys an easy way to get those water pump pulley bolts off? With the 10mm ring spanner, turn it clockwise, not anti-clockwise but clockwise, and those bolts will come out super fast and you won't even drop a single one. Nice and easy. Once the inner and outer water pump pulleys have been removed, I'll be removing the timing belt upper cover, and there's 4 bolts that hold this particular cover in place. Once the timing belt upper cover has been removed, the next thing you want to look for is a timing mark on the camshaft sprocket, which is that round hole. It's got to line up with that timing mark on the cylinder head cover, which is that red cutout just there. And to achieve that, I'm going to get the 22mm socket, extension bar and 1/2" ratchet. I'm going to place that onto the crankshaft pulley bolt and turn the motor clockwise. Only clockwise, and don't turn it from the camshaft bolt. It's got to be from the crankshaft bolt, otherwise the pulley may jump teeth on the belt and the alignment will be out of whack. You can now see the timing mark on the cylinder head, which is that red mark, is perfectly lined up in the middle of that hole in the camshaft sprocket, and that's what you want to try to achieve. I'll try and show you a different angle so you can get a better view on it. And that's it there. The reason why I've got to use the telescopic mirror is that high pressure power steering hose is in the way, so you really need to use that mirror. And that's the hole there. Okay, next with the impact gun, I'm going to remove the crankshaft pulley bolt. That's it there. And then next what you want to do is place one hand in the 3 o'clock position and your other hand at the 9 o'clock position, and just pull that pulley back and it should just slip straight off. There's no need for any specialised pullers. Then next, you want to remove the crankshaft flange plate there, and that's just a little guide plate that helps to keep the timing belt in alignment. And then you want to remove the timing belt lower cover. Okay, now that all the covers are off, I'll just quickly show you guys what it looks like back there. Now you're probably thinking, what a dog's breakfast? But don't let a job like this intimidate you. If you follow these step-by-step instructions, you should be right, you won't have any problems. Also, what you'll probably notice that your timing marks are slightly out, like you can see there. It's a couple of millimeters out of whack. Now the reason for this is when using the impact gun on the crankshaft pulley bolt, it actually turns the motor anti-clockwise from the force of using the gun. So you'll have to straighten that back up, and also double check that all your marks are lined up when we go to put the new belt on. And to realign those timing marks back up again, simply just grab your multi-grips onto the crankshaft and just turn it until those timing marks are lined up again. Okay, next I'll be removing the timing belt tensioner and spring. Okay, there's our timing belt tensioner bearing and spring. And now I'll be removing the timing belt. And there you have it, one timing belt. Okay, going back to the alternator, we can now completely remove the adjuster out of the car. And that's what that adjuster looks like. And there's our water pump. Okay, what you want to do next is get yourself familiar with the new water pump and the location of those bolts, so you make sure you're taking off the correct bolts. And two of those water pump bolts actually hold the alternator bracket into place for the adjuster. Okay, next you want to reposition your drip tray under the engine. And then once you've removed the last bolt, you need to get your pry bar and just pry up against the water pump, and it should just pop off. You can see how clean that water is. There's no coolant in that water whatsoever. So we're pretty successful in doing that flush. And there you have it, one water pump. Now what you want to do next is sit them side by side just to make some comparisons and make sure the new one's the correct one. Then with the scraper, you want to scrape off the old gasket, and just be careful not to put any scratches into the engine block. Now on an aluminium engine, you have to be very careful not to put any deep scratches there because you don't want to create a leak. Once you've removed all the gasket, just get your emery cloth and just finalise that area so it's nice and clean. And then finish it off with some multifunction cleaner and give it a wipe down with a nice clean rag. Okay, next I'm going to apply a little bit of Durco sealant onto the water pump. You only need a thin film, don't go putting too much on a water pump. As it dries, the excess gasket will break off and travel through the cooling system. And what normally happens, it will get caught up in the radiator core, and it will restrict the flow of water from the engine to the radiator and back to the engine, which will cause the car to overheat. And you don't want that to happen. And it's the same process with the water pump gasket. Okay, this next step is critical. You want to really take your time doing this, and you want to have 2 or 3 bolts close by, because once you place that water pump on the engine block, you can't let go because the water pump will fall off. So you want to have at least 2 or 3 bolts in your other hand or in your pocket. Also make sure any bracketry that's supposed to go back on, now's the time to do it. And make sure you tighten all the bolts down evenly. Okay, what you want to do next is go through your owner's manual and look up the manufacturer's recommendations on the ratio of coolant mix to water. And in this case here, it's a 50-50 mix with water. Okay, next I'll be using the hose clamp pliers on the radiator overflow hose. Now the reason why I do this, sometimes when you're pouring coolant into the radiator, if it goes in a bit too quickly, it can actually fill up the reservoir bottle, and that can mess up your ratio. So you want to make sure you want to get majority of that coolant in the radiator, then you can put some in the reservoir bottle. Now on this particular vehicle, it has a 5.5 litre cooling system capacity, so you want to make sure you mix your coolant antifreeze anti-boil ratio to 50%. And pour all that in. Then top up the rest with demineralized water or distilled water. At this point, it's probably a good idea to squeeze your top radiator hose several times to burp any air out of the system, which will lower the risk of overheating. Okay, once you've filled up the radiator, what you want to do next is fill up the radiator reservoir bottle to the maximum mark. Okay, next you can screw on your radiator reservoir cap. Okay, now I'm going to perform a cooling system pressure test to ensure we have no leaks. Just screwing on the adapter, plugging our connection on, and we're going to pressurize it to approximately 15 psi. If you're unsure, you can always go off your radiator cap. There's usually a maximum setting there. And what you want to do is keep an eye on that reading and make sure it doesn't drop off. If it drops off, we have a leak. Now what you want to do while it's under pressure is do a final visual inspection to ensure there are no leaks after filling the cooling system. And you want to hope there's no leaks, because if that needle drops off, you'll be mad as a cut snake, because more than likely you're going to have to remove that water pump and see what's gone wrong. And in this case here, everything's perfect. Ripper, you beauty. Okay, next I'm going to safely release the pressure from the pressure tester and then disconnect it off the cap. And then remove the cap. Next I'm going to refit the radiator cap. And then the air cleaner lid. And refit the timing belt tensioner. But don't fully tighten the bolts just yet. Because what we need to do first before we fit this belt, we need to make sure our camshaft sprocket and our crankshaft sprocket timing marks are all lined up and dead center. So what that means, number 1 cylinder is at top dead center compression. So once we have all our timing marks lined up, what we need to do next is to force the tensioner pulley back by using a flat blade screwdriver to push the tensioner upwards, then lock the 12mm bolt down, and then we can install the timing belt. First you want to place the timing belt on the crankshaft sprocket first, then the idler pulley, the camshaft sprocket, and the timing belt tensioner. So in other words, you're going in an anti-clockwise direction. And make sure there's no belt slack between the pulleys. Okay, now I'm going to loosen off the tensioner bolt, and you'll see the tensioner spring forward, so it's going to apply the correct tension to the timing belt. And there you have it. And next I'll be applying 26 Newton meters of torque to both of the tensioner bolts. Okay, once all that's done, I'm going to rotate the crankshaft 2 full revolutions clockwise, and then realign the crankshaft and camshaft sprockets timing marks. And once we've confirmed that our crankshaft and camshaft timing marks are absolutely spot on, this virtually ensures us there'll be no valve to piston damage when we go to start the engine up. So our engine timing will be absolutely perfect. Okay, once I've installed the lower timing belt cover, I can then install the flange plate and then tighten up the lower cover bolts. And then install the timing belt upper cover and tighten all the upper cover bolts. Next, install the crankshaft pulley and then apply thread locker to the crankshaft pulley bolt. And next, with our universal sprocket holding tool and our 1/2 inch torque wrench, I'm going to apply 147 Newton meters of torque to that crankshaft pulley bolt. Okay, next I'll be fitting the inner and outer water pump pulleys. Remember the trick I showed you earlier, the easy way to get the bolts out? Well, it's the same process to get them in. Nice and easy. It's just a really tight fitting that's really hard to get your hand down there. And now I'm going to fit the power steering belt. You want to place that on the water pump pulley first and then onto the power steering pump pulley. It's much easier doing it that way. And then the air conditioning belt. And finally the alternator belt. And don't forget to tighten up your water pump pulley bolts. And don't go over tightening them because you don't want to break them off. And then you can tighten up the alternator pivoting nut. And the power steering belt. Now when applying tension to your power steering belt and you're using a pry bar, make sure you're not prying up against a plastic surface such as a timing belt cover, because you'll definitely crack it or break it. Make sure it's up against a metal surface. And once you're happy with the tension of the power steering belt, then you can tighten up the power steering pivoting bolt. The engine dipstick, and then you can fully tighten up the alternator adjuster locking bolt. Next, refit the right hand side cover. Okay, next I'm going to lube up the wheel studs with a bit of WD-40, and when spraying WD-40 onto the wheel studs, you can either spray in a downward motion or parallel to the disc. This way you'll minimise any overspray on the disc surface. Okay, next I'm going to fit the wheel and then the wheel nuts. Now when tightening your wheel nuts up, go in a crisscross action, don't go in a circular action. Now on this particular car, a Hyundai Getz, I'll be torquing up the wheel nuts to 110 Newton meters. Now when you tighten up your wheel nuts, never have the full weight of the car down on the ground, just have the tyre just touching the ground. And once all the wheel nuts are torqued up, you can drop the rest of the weight of the car down. Next, start the engine and make sure your heater fan is turned on and eventually blowing hot air. Make sure your radiator fans come on and off, then recheck your coolant level once the engine has cooled down. And if your radiator fans don't turn off, it means you have an airlock in the cooling system, which will cause the engine to overheat. Just let the engine cool down and re-top up the coolant in the radiator, and it will be right to drive after that. And then just monitor the coolant level for the next couple of days just to make sure everything is okay. And that, guys, is how you change a timing belt, a water pump and a cooling system flush on an engine properly. And if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button not to miss out on any future videos. And I'll see you on the next episode of Red Pill Garage. Thank you for watching.